Yeah, here we go. Help a Teacher Facebook Live. And, listen, this is a pretty exciting week for me. I know, as someone who has been on the road for over a decade and speaking at thousands of schools and conferences across the nation, my life significantly changed last March simply because with the pandemic, man, like I'm not in classrooms, I'm not on the stage, I'm not at conferences. I'm just stuck in my house talking to the little dot on my computer screen at you. And but this week I actually got to have some real life people in front of me. I was in Orangefield, Texas, and was working with kids, and gosh, man, it was just so amazing. I tell you, like I forget just how awesome it is to meet those kids and feel like just for a second I'm a part of their life. And it's certainly not the power that their teacher has in the classroom that is there day in and day out, and they get to see that metamorphosis of that kid over the 9-month period. But those 48 minutes I had, just getting to just play a tiny role in the life of these kids, it was awesome, man. I didn't sleep for a couple days just because I was just tossing and turning, thinking about it, and just what an incredible honor, and not just that, man, just the responsibility that we have as we stand before kids each day, man. And it's been awesome. All right, but here's the other thing I noticed is, in that school, that those teachers, especially at that school, they teach with such passion and energy and enthusiasm. And I do know that with the challenges that we have with COVID and being distanced from kids, and they're all masked up and trying to spread kids out and having additional lunches, we got some kids still online. That this profession, more than ever, I mean, it's always been really, really hard, but more than ever, it's just extraordinarily difficult and challenging for teachers to take care of themselves. I mean, they spend so much time taking care of their kids and so much time, worrying about school stuff that they tend to forget to make themselves a priority and to show themselves compassion. That's the interesting thing. As educators, they're so good at showing parents compassion. They're so good at showing their kids compassion. They even make excuses for principals, administrators, and show them compassion. But when it comes to themselves, I really, I feel like sometimes we put ourselves at the bottom of the list rather than the top of the list. And anytime that crosses my mind, the one person that I think about that I want to talk to about it is Kristin McKeown, because she just kind of has this teacher zen thing figured out, and this whole thing about just being intentional with balance in our lives and looking at where our priorities are. And with the thing that makes me think of her, I'm not sure if this is what was ever effective, but I remember at a few professional development workshops, we do that thing where you kind of make the pie chart and you shade in from the center outward what percent you think of what area of your life. There's personal and spiritual and emotional health and intellectual, and family, and then you realize how lopsided your wheel is. I'm not sure I'm the kind of guy that would ever get a round wheel perfect and symmetrical and it would run smooth, but I know I do need help because I have, some of my areas of life go all the way to the edge and some barely get out from the hub. But anytime I think about that, I always think about Kristin, because there's just something about her energy and her experiences and all that she shares with educators that helps bring me back to center. And I think you too. So all the way from somewhere up north, I'm going to say Colorado. Is that right? Did I get it right?
Correct. Yes, Denver, Colorado.
Denver. Yeah. And so here's the thing. I do know this is when I think about teachers, and it's almost as if we have to force them to take care of themselves and force them to take a day and force, and I'm just wondering, like, for those teachers that you work with and all of your clients and the people that are, in your groups and subscribe to your material and your content, how do you get them to move themselves from the bottom to the middle and somewhere to the top of the list when it comes to taking care?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's interesting because if you had asked me this a year ago before COVID, I would have had much more of an answer like you need to prioritize your self-care and, put yourself first and all of these things. And while I think that that's true, what I have observed, because of course I'm very dialed into so much of the teacher social media and what people are saying, is ironically, the message that I'm hearing, that teachers are hearing, is they're being told you have to prioritize your self-care, and self-care is important, and do this and do that. But the real issue is that, as you spoke of a moment ago, like, things are harder and more challenging than they've ever been. And they started out being difficult and challenging and not having enough time. And we all know how that goes. And now there's the, all people, I saw one post that was really poignant. That was, if I have to experience another PD about self-care without you actually giving me something, time, whatever resources it might be, I'm going to explode, because you're just giving me more like pressure to do something that I don't already have the time to do. And you're not supporting me. You're just telling me that this is something that I should be doing. And now I have another thing that I feel bad about doing inadequately. And so that is very different than it was, pre-COVID. And I feel like I'm really hearing that from teachers, and hopefully doing what we can just to help people to figure it out, and to remind them to self-advocate and say those things to, their team members, their leadership, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think these are hard topics to talk about, because I mean, these
Mhm.
are really tough conversations coming from a a teacher, because I really do. This isn't true everywhere. I know it's not true, but I know generally I have been in a lot of schools where administrators, because of how hard their job is and how separate their job is from the classroom
Mhm.
teacher, that a lot of times they're just out of touch and they really don't get what the classroom teacher is talking about. That's not to say they're a bad person or a bad
Sure.
leader. It's
Yeah.
just their job is so intensely hard in a different way
Mhm.
that it's hard for them to connect what the teacher really needs and then what the teacher is really asking for. And I think sometimes maybe as educators, we're not specific enough
Mm.
in in our request and identifying and articulating what we need.
Mm. I would agree with that. And so there's the external piece of things are harder than ever. People are struggling as teachers. And wherever you are now, in terms of the remote, hybrid, or in person spectrum, I mean, it's all just difficult. And, we can talk definitely about, what we just threw out there, which is, there's just no time and everything's too hard. And the one thing I would say that I keep coming back to, and I keep coming back to it for myself, I really feel like you actually referenced it at the beginning, at the intro, is this idea of self-compassion. So yes, you might not have time to go do yoga, or you might not have time to, fill in the blank, whatever the self-care expectation is. But the one thing that I really feel that is useful for us to keep reminding ourselves of is how important it is for us to extend self-compassion to ourselves, and what that looks like, and how profoundly affecting it can be. I mean, it's very subtle, but it really can make a big difference, and it has for me this year.
Yeah, I think figuring that piece out is critical. And for me, I think what it has been a combination of playing around with that thought. Well,
Mhm.
it's a few things. Is one is the idea of I'm just going to experiment and play around with concepts and ideas and thoughts, and I don't have
Mhm.
to get it right, because I think
Mhm.
as educators that there's a lot of them. Lot of us are just straight up perfectionists. That's
Oh.
why, because we became teachers. We were in school, and now we're doing this. And the other thing is, I try to figure out is how do I know if I've been successful today, and what I'm talking about is treating myself well, and I call it win the day. So what does
Mm.
it take to win the day? And
Mhm.
it's just a few things, and if I can check those off, I've earned the right to feel great about it. And sometimes, it's I've worked hard at this. It's not really a completion check off. It was as much as I gave it my effort during that time.
Mhm.
Gets a check.
Mhm. Absolutely. I mean, I think a big part of what we're talking about is certainly celebrating those wins. We are mentally, psychologically predisposed to minimize our successes and to magnify the things that we feel are subpar, that we're falling short in, and that's just how it is. And part of that goes back evolutionarily to, you had to always be, scanning your environment, what's dangerous, all of that fight, flight, or freeze kind of stuff. And that's just how we are, and that's fine. And ways to disrupt that are to do something kind of like you just said, like how did you win the day? Or, gratitude journals, which people have kind of mixed feelings about. Like some people think they're a little too whatever, touchy feely. And I'm not a gratitude journal person necessarily, but I like to dip a toe into that from time to time because, yeah, I might be freaking out about something, or I might be feeling I just am awful and not at, getting, performing or being the way I prefer I'd like to be. But things are okay. They're even when they're not okay, they're more okay than we realize. And so that's a big part of it as well. Celebrating those wins, emphasizing what we have to be grateful for, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I remember somebody told me a long time, ago that no one is as great as you think they are. No one is as bad as you think they are. But I think it's
Mhm.
also true about situations. Nothing is as bad as you think it is in the moment. Nothing is wonderful as you might suspect it is.
Mhm.
And for me, I think that when you talk about the gratitude journal, let me tell you something, lady. I have made a commitment.
Uh-huh.
I do a few minutes each morning.
Hmm.
I do a combo, and where I do some gratitude, and I set the timer. I do 5 minutes. I'm just going to free write in my journal for 5 minutes about what I'm thankful for and what I appreciate and feel myself for. And then I spend the next couple minutes. This is going to freak you out. I close my eyes. I take deep breaths. I quiet my mind down, and I actually feel the feelings of gratitude that I just wrote about.
Mm. Wow, that's great.
I
Wow,
know,
nice.
listen, I know it borders on a little something.
No, hey,
It's
you're
getting,
in good company when it comes to that. No, I get that. I mean, there's something to be said. A word I like to use a lot is savoring. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
savoring the wins, savoring those good feelings. Something that's coming up for me a lot right now is things are really difficult, and we could all go through the laundry list of what we've been through this year, and even the past like week perhaps. And yet at the same time, even though there's a lot of challenges and there's a lot of difficulties, I think we also have to give ourselves permission to savor what's good for the same reason that we were just discussing. You have to really. I remember I had not this past year, but a couple of years ago, a 25th wedding anniversary. And it was sort of ironically timed after a series of losses in my life. And I remember, everybody gets up and says things and all of that. We had a big party and a dinner. And I remember when I spoke, I reminded everyone, like, let's enjoy this. Like, let's give ourselves permission to really be deeply present to everything worth savoring and not feel bad about it, because we are all going to go through difficulties and challenges and everything like that. And it's these moments that we allow ourselves to savor, whether they are small or big, that buoy us through the difficult things that ultimately will inevitably occur. And so that just feels very salient to me. I wanted to bring that up. It just, I don't know, felt like it was connected.
yeah. You know, last few days, I've really been thinking about those educators that I know that have a little bit of a handle on self-care and balance in their life. And I've been trying to figure out like what are the ingredients in their individual recipe.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure there is anything, and they a lot that they have in common, but I do know one thing is that they seem to have something outside of school that they're really passionate about.
Hmm.
And it's almost that they force them. And it's because I think when we talk about self-care, if there's not something that we're really passionate about outside of the schoolhouse, it's almost like we have to force ourselves to stop. We have to force ourselves to
Hmm.
take a break.
Hmm.
But for them, since they have this other thing, and some people it's church, and some people it's art, some people it's fitness, like whatever it is, they're not
Hmm.
forcing because they so deeply want to engage in that activity that
Hmm.
really helps them balance it out.
Hmm. I would agree with that. It's interesting as you say that. It reminds me of something that I've also observed when it comes to educators. I think all of us, in some form or fashion, really see our work as a higher calling, and the result of that feeling is that there is this inclination and sort of predisposition to perhaps prioritize what we perceive to be as the work that needs to be done so that we can keep going with this important work that we do. But the problem with that, and the reason why viewing it too solely in that regard, is then everything else falls short. And now, as you're saying, this idea of having a passion, and not everybody does, some people, it might just be their family, it
Yeah.
might just be health or whatever it might be. But no matter what it is and to what degree you feel passionate about it outside of your calling as an educator, no matter what, being an educator does not take priority over your relationships. It doesn't take priority over your personal health. It doesn't, and I know it's important, and I know a lot of us feel very identified with it as people. Like, it's not, I can't imagine if somebody asked me what I did if I couldn't say a teacher. And I get that, and I value that myself as well. And I also think that we need to start to loosen the the baggage that comes with that, because I don't think it's doing us really any service when it comes to being well and being balanced. And if it's useful to even think of it this way, you won't be able to keep doing this important work that is a calling if you don't necessarily figure out in what way works for you, how to make sure that you're attending to your health and you're resting and doing all those things that sometimes can look like balance.
Yeah. There's just this idea I've been thinking about for a few years, and it is interesting. And it's not just educators. I know it's other professions. I've seen nurses do it. I was there's been other. I know I was at a happy hour and there's a group of social workers next to
Mhm,
me having drinks. I saw them go through it, and I thought, what a bunch
mhm,
of real teachers that they are. And that is, some because this job is so hard, you have to process it and you have to get out this information. And then you here's what happened in class. Oh my gosh, and this has happened. It's really dramatic. And
mhm.
it's almost toxic compassion in a way when somebody
Yes.
goes, ugh, I know, right?
Mhm,
And they
mhm.
pile on with their story. And the next person, like,
Yes.
I get it that there has to be a safe place with people who understand, because you can't go home and tell your spouse if they're not a teacher, they
Mhm,
don't get it. But at the same time, I really wish that we could get in a habit of taking that time, but end it with, let's not forget what we're doing. Here's the
mhm.
difference I made in this kid's life, and then go back around the circle one more time with
Right.
something positive.
Yeah. It's so funny. I've heard that before in a variety of contexts. And the thing that's challenging about that is, on the one hand, it feels as though there might be some catharsis to venting, as people say. But believe it or not, it actually is not as productive as sometimes people think it is. Yes, I agree with you that there needs to be a processing. Unfortunately, though, what it can often look like is you're just kind of telling that story to all the people. So you're telling your colleagues, you're telling your friend, you're telling your partner, whatever it might be. And all you're doing, unfortunately, in that case, is you're just re-triggering and reactivating all of the stress and the emotions that are associated with it. And you're actually not looking for resolution, at least not always, but in many cases, you're just venting. And by not actually, for example, at a happy hour, engaging with your colleagues, like, this was really frustrating for me. Do you guys have any suggestions
Yeah.
about how I can work with this? Or, I'm open to your thoughts about X, Y, or Z. I always feel like it's really important. And honestly, I actually feel this very strongly. I talked about my 25th wedding anniversary, but even with your partner at home, that yes, you might want to talk about some things and work through some stuff in a way that's very intentional. But I have a former colleague, a dear friend, who would talk about how she would take these after work walks with her husband. And it was like, instead of dueling banjos, it was dueling like who had the worst day and all the terrible things that happened.
Right.
And that's not how you want to spend your time with this person who is your support and your love, you really want to nurture more pro-social and
Yeah.
positive, useful, and productive types of emotions. Now, I think there's a range to all of this, but I do think that there's something to be said for that. And the last thing I'll say, besides the whole partner piece, is when you do it at school, in your office or whatever it might be, I think we have to even be more thoughtful about it, because we are also just agitating and activating our colleagues. I had one person one time years ago, she would come in and vent all the time. And it's like, hey, I got my own stuff. I can't digest your stuff and mine. You're going to need to hold back. And I think everybody knows that there's
Right.
all the shades to this, but you get the idea.
For me, I think what you were talking about at the very beginning is, we are giving, lots of professional development on you need to take care of yourself and self-care. But what I really wish is we had some instruction on how to do this, on how to
Hmm.
process and how to have these conversations, and be given a model, a template on how to
Hmm.
facilitate these kinds of conversations so we can all walk away refreshed. We processed our stuff, we got it out, we didn't have to
Hmm.
relive it and get re-triggered emotionally,
Hmm.
but it's out there, and we feel re-energized, inspired, and reconnected with our purpose for making a difference in the lives of kids. I think something like that,
Hmm.
but I think most schools simply don't have that. So I guess what I'm hoping is to maybe learn from you is, with all of the research you've done and the training and looking into this, for that teacher who feels alone
Hmm.
and they leave school and then the car heading
Hmm.
home, if there's something a to do, something they could do
Hmm.
today, tonight,
Hmm.
tomorrow morning, to get recentered and refocused and just refreshed emotionally, what would it be?
I just think you have to bring it back to this idea of self-compassion, which we're talking about the term, but if you don't mind, let me kind of tease it out a little bit. When I think of self-compassion, I think of that as a combination of self-acceptance and self-kindness. And of course, this can go in a lot of different directions, but one thing that falls under that is being aware of and being willing to not believe, for example, your inner critic. Like, I just remember for so long going home and feeling like I messed this up. I could have done better with that kid. And, I'm an imposter, and, it goes on and on. And that is just your inner critic, doing its thing. You're not good enough, all of the things that whatever that voice in our head tends to say, whether we're picking it up from the culture, from our childhood, from whatever way that we're somehow picking it up, and we're playing that on this loop in our head. And unfortunately, what happens is that can really unnecessarily drain our energy even further. So yes, you had a difficult day, and yeah, maybe you could have done a little better with that kid, but maybe you did amazing and you're not even realizing it, and you're just kind of beating yourself up about it, and you're just expending all of this really precious energy. I mean, we all know how exhausting this is. You're expending this precious energy on beating yourself up and telling yourself that you're no good, and that, teacher X down the hall has it so much more together than you, and whatever it might be. And it's not helpful. It's not productive. And I could go into an extended remix of why it's not, and all of that. But I think that is a really important piece of self-compassion, is being willing to not believe everything you think, to not believe your inner critic. And I have some suggestions on how you can disrupt that. And then the other piece, I would say, when it comes to this self-kindness and self-compassion, is just realize everybody is winging it, all the time. Some people on the surface seem to look like they have it more together, but aren't we all just going through life trying to appear as though we have it together so that people don't think we don't? And and everybody is that way. And as you look around and compare yourself to others, that also is not very fruitful. And it's very, very useful, I think, to, instead of beating yourself up for not being whatever, instead really offering yourself the kindness and compassion that you would offer to a dear friend. Like you wouldn't tell a friend who was dealing with the same thing, like, yeah, you suck. You really need to get it together. You're
Yeah.
going to tell them like, but I'm sure you did your best and this is really hard. And, this kind of like self-talk, talking to yourself as though you were talking to a friend, or the flip of that, letting yourself hear what a good friend would say to you, instead of what you're saying to yourself, and letting that kindness and that compassion and that tenderness, if I could go that far as to say, to really wash over you, because that's what's going to actually help. That's what's going to keep your energy in a much more productive place and help you to grow and learn and all of those things, not the self-flagellation. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. Man, there's, that just, thinking so much about that, that like the whole idea of winging it, it's so true. Like unless we're working on an assembly line, and my job is to put the screw in, into that threaded hole. And
Right.
what it's not, these are kids, and they're all different every day, and every class is different across the school, and every day it's all different. And really, we're all just trying to figure it out as we go along. And of course, we develop some skills and experiences along the way that help us be better. But even on our last day of our career, essentially, we're still just slinging it around, just sort of winging it, trying to hope
Mhm.
this thing comes together. And I think what is equally challenging, if I work on assembly line and my job really is to drive that bolt in, well, I can see that I've been successful. There's evidence right there. Every day I get evidence that I did a good job, one after the other. But with kids, very rarely are we ever going to say something to a kid, and kid is going to look up and look in the eyes and say, thank you so much. That just changed my life. I'm on a whole nother trajectory because of you and this moment. That
Right.
rarely, I don't know about your experience, but I can't remember that happening. But,
No.
I think for me, it, after, 3 decades, I know, I don't need the evidence, because I know that everything that we do has an impact on that kid. And if
Mhm.
if we do something positive, I know I'm going to shift that kid's trajectory just a hair, but it doesn't look like much now. It's
Mhm.
it's imperceptible right now, but over
Right.
the course of time, this kid is going to end up in a whole different universe because of this tiny moment. And I think with experience, that just it just helps a lot for me.
Mhm. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. But just this idea, it feels like we're hitting on a few interesting like themes. This idea of savoring and allowing yourself to really celebrate any wins. This would be something that I would encourage anybody to do, whether you're starting out as a new teacher or if you've, been in it for years and years, and many of us have just sort of done this naturally, is just start keeping things. And I'm not talking about being like a hoarder and stuff, but I always had a file. And so, of course, pre-emails and all of that, it would be cards and notes from kids like, thank you so much, this was really nice, or from a parent. And now, I know it's very unfashionable, but I'll print out an email and I'll put it in my folder. And what was really useful to me, I can't say that I really like dipped into it very often during my career, but what I did is when I transitioned from the classroom into the library, and then when I was preparing to actually leave education, I was looking at like one or two every day. And oh my God, did that feed my soul? I
Yeah.
mean, in ways that you just don't remember and you just don't know. And sometimes it's the silly thing like, thanks for this or that, and it's very light. But sometimes, you actually hear from someone. And I think it's so important for us to keep those things and savor them and let them, feed us. It's just so important.
It really is. And, I think if we combined, I know this isn't what we do naturally. It's almost as if it would have to be scheduled in. But can you imagine a world where, but prior to beginning our day, we all had the opportunity just to take a few minutes to really be grateful and really feel the emotion of gratitude that we have, this
Mhm.
opportunity that we have. And when we end the day, to
Mhm.
look through those wins that we've had, and those little, those trophies that, and, I think yes, I've have a file, and I actually have a big Tupperware box, and my wife calls it my big box of ego. Not sure what that means, but, but,
I love
but
that.
but there's little trophies every day, but we don't recognize them. I think that is the other challenge we have as educators is, oh my God, like kids' lives are being changed in the moment. And because
Mhm,
this is our job and we see it every day, we don't recognize it for what it is. We
mhm,
just think, oh, okay. And we go on with our day.
mhm.
When in any other profession, that this is a life-changing moment for a child, and to get in the habit of noticing what really is happening for that kid, and know it's because we're responsible for a big part of that, and
Mhm.
to celebrate, savor and celebrate, like you said, I mean, I really think it would help a lot.
Yeah, I agree. And as we're talking about this, the other thing I'm thinking about, because we've talked about, not beating yourself up and not regurgitating like all of the, the sort of venting thing. But the one thing I want to make sure that I mention, because we're sort of emphasizing the positive, which is very much a part of education culture, like don't talk about your problems. Everything's fine, and we're all kind of you're sure you're familiar with the whole idea of like toxic positivity, like no bad
Right.
vibes. And so I want to make sure that we don't not acknowledge that what I'm talking about isn't about not feeling your feelings and not, being willing to acknowledge this is really hard. Like if you're driving home from a rough day at school and you're crying behind the wheel,
Yeah.
that's okay, and let yourself feel that and be there, but also while you're holding that pain and that, what was hard for you, offering yourself that compassion like you would for a dear friend. So yeah, oh my God, this was awful. Like you, even if it's a really bad one, like you blew it.
Yeah.
Still offering yourself that compassion, like, you know what? Nobody is perfect. You couldn't have seen X coming. I mean, it's not about making excuses and it's not about, self-indulgence, but it's really just more about being willing to be aware of and present to your feelings, holding them. And then this is, my world is all about mindfulness, but a big part of the mindfulness piece is noticing your feelings, noticing your emotions as they arise, and not turning them away from them, which I'm going to get to a little bit more in a second. And it's not about feeding them and telling yourself the story over and over again, but instead just being very present to them in this compassionate way, and even if you can, feeling where you might feel that in the body. So if you're feeling a sense of like, deep disappointment, where do you feel that? And there's something about retreating into the physical sensations that is deeply comforting and empowering simultaneously. And so there's a real comfort in that. I'm being willing to feel it, to not numb it in some of the ways that sometimes we do, and also to not minimize it in one way being like, stuff it down. I'm fine. I'm fine. And also minimizing, I think we also minimize our experiences and our challenging emotions by saying, well, they're not as valid because somebody else has it harder or somebody else is dealing with something way more challenging. Yeah, that might be true, but it doesn't, unvalidate what you're experiencing, and your feelings are just as important and relevant. And so that's another piece to it, is it giving yourself this compassion, not only to not feed the story and to not just sort of do this venting thing that's not productive, but just to let yourself feel it, work through it, feel it in your body, and offer yourself that compassion like you would to a dear friend. I think that's just a useful way to work with that, to a very long answer to your simple question for the teacher going
Hmm.
home all by themselves today.
Hey, for one last thing, and that is, some of the stories of just emotional transformation that I hear from those teachers that take time and um to meditate. You know, could you talk to us a little bit about that, and maybe like why that is so effective in the work that you do with teachers and meditation and all that?
Mhm. I would say the most important thing before we actually talk about meditating
Yeah.
is just give yourself permission at any point, multiple times a day, to just pause and take a few very deep, slow breaths, which is hard for a lot of people because we're also, kind of in this upper chest activated cortisol fueled kind of state of stress, which for many of us has become, our more common state than is really in our best interest. And so whenever you can, sometimes I tell people, like, put a sticky note on your computer, on your wall, or do something that's a visual trigger. Some people do, if they have a fancy, smartwatch, the watch will give them a little zip or whatever it is. But whatever you can think to do so, just pause and take a few deep breaths. And then if you really want to get fancy, you can check in with what's often called the triangle of awareness, where you're basically just noticing. And this is not trying to change it, switch it, fix it, adjust it. You're just noticing. You just notice the sensations that are present in your body. So maybe you might feel, a little tension back here or whatever it might be. Then noticing whatever thoughts are really dominant for you right now, being very metacognitive about what are the images that you're seeing in your mind. What kinds of thoughts are you experiencing right now? Again, you're not pushing them away. You're not trying to quiet your mind or anything. You're just noticing. And so if you notice that it's a lot of worry about, let's say, a student of yours and her circumstances and what she's dealing with, then you can really just notice, like, okay, worrying about that student and replaying the thing that happened yesterday that's still bothering me, or whatever it is. And you just have more clarity about the movie that's going on in your mind all day long, in addition to, of course, what you're working on and the tasks that you're trying to complete and all of that. And then the last one is just noticing emotions that are present, and being willing to acknowledge those. And that can include states of mind like tiredness or agitation. But sometimes it can be a real sense of deep peace. It can be a quality of sadness that exists, but we're not even really giving ourselves the opportunity to acknowledge it. And like I said, you're not trying to fix it. You're not trying to resolve it in this, very short 30-second, 60-second thing, but you're just allowing yourself to tune into what's going on. So sensations, thoughts, and emotions. And that's called the pause practice. And I learned that through my work with Passage Works, which I'm a faculty member of. It's a nonprofit also here in Colorado that does a lot of amazing work, not only with mindfulness for educators, but also a lot of important equity work as well.
Awesome. Hey, listen, so for those teachers that want to get into it and connect with you and learn more and reach this Zen place, how would they do that?
I would love for people to find me in wherever they find themselves. So if you're a social media person, on Facebook, it's Teaching Balance LLC.
Mm-hmm.
On Instagram, which honestly is probably where I'm most active, it's just Teaching Balance. YouTube, I actually just released a lot of my vintage videos from the vault. And I know you'll get that reference.
Yes.
And made them public. For a long time, they were just specifically for members, but I've accumulated so many that I wanted to release a bunch. So you can find me at YouTube. And I think that is, if you just search my name or Teaching Balance, you'll probably find it. And if you subscribe to me, that would be cool, because then I can create a unique URL, which I can't do yet. So those are the primary places. And of course, at teachingbalance.com.
Cool. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. I always appreciate it, and make us a promise that we'll do it again soon.
I would love that. That'd be super fun. Thank you for inviting me. It's always a
All right.
pleasure.
Have a great night.
You too. Take care. Thanks, everybody.
Bye bye.